Is this thing on?
Yesterday's price is not today's price.
Welcome back to another episode of the Run the Numbers podcast. I am privileged to be here with Ryan Walsh, who's the CEO and founder of RepVue. Ryan, what's going on, man?
Thanks, CJ. Appreciate it. Yeah, great to be here.
A lot of finance people who listen to the pod are the ones who are coming up with sales capacity planning models and sales rep commission plans. And I've been searching for a while for an expert to help go deep on this topic. And I think I've found my man. So are you ready to dive into this sales rep stuff?
Totally ready. I love it. It's a great topic.
So off the bat, I just want to qualify why I believe you're uniquely talented to help go over this. Can you just give like the 30-second overview of what RepVue does and how you set up to start this company?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm the founder and CEO of RepVue, and RepVue is a platform where B2B salespeople will go. Essentially on the platform, they will submit a rating of their sales organization, highly objective, mostly data-driven submission of their sales organization. It captures things like their sentiment around professional development, culture, training. We capture things like the percent of team that hits quota, deal cycle lengths, average deal size. In exchange for that, when they sign up, they get access to the platform. And what RepVue is really good at, and the problem that we're ultimately solving, is the ability for salespeople to have access to really unique, really digestible information about what it's really like to work for any of the world's most well-known sales organizations. And so what I was going to say, what we're really good at is taking all this data that we get, thousands of submissions a week from B2B salespeople, and really kind of digesting it and presenting it back to them in a very kind of clean, usable format in the form of a profile of company.
And to give a tangible example, I was telling you before the pod started that I went for a jog with my buddy this morning, and he was a rep at Salesforce, and now he's kind of opening his eyes to what other opportunities are out there. And something cool that blew his mind with RepVue is you may hear from a recruiter, hey, the base is $200K, the commission's $200K, OTE 400. But the dirty secret is that only like 40% or so, it depends company to company, of reps actually hit that commission target. So you could be walking into something where maybe the product isn't as good as you thought it was, or maybe the culture isn't as good, or it's just not likely that the goals are going to be aligned to your expectations. So RepVue definitely resonates with sales reps who are looking for their next gig.
Yeah, love it. I appreciate the anecdote, the story, and that's really core to the mission. And in Salesforce, that's an example of a great company, but every role is different and every manager is different. Every organization is managed differently. And so yeah, base and OTE is really just a fraction of the story of, can I win in this job or at this company? You've got to go way deeper than that. So kind of what we're trying to help with.
So maybe to kick it off here, I wanted to talk about common comp structures that you see across tech companies. The structure in my mind is usually like a 50-50 base variable. Is that usually what you see, or can this be different flavors?
So RepVue also captures salary information for every submission. We have hundreds of thousands over the last couple of years. So the technology account executive typically is 50-50, can stray from there a little bit. When you get outside of kind of concentric circles of supporting sales roles, a sales development rep might be 65% base, 35% variable. An account manager, maybe they carry a quota, maybe it's a hybrid quota, existing customers plus some new customers, or maybe it's all existing customers. Maybe that's 55 to 60%. It starts to skew, again, a little bit more towards the base versus the variable. If you're a manager managing account executives, you're going to still be close to 50-50. As you get up in the org, you might skew a little bit more. But I think in technology companies, software companies, you're still looking at, for the most part, 50-50 base variable. And really what that means is, you use an example, I'll use another example. You have a $100,000 base. Like if you get a job offer, $100,000 base salary, so that's guaranteed. And then you have $100,000 that if you hit right at your plan, at your quota, your target, right on the number, you would expect another 100,000. So then obviously you'd want to be able to overachieve that if possible. But of course, on the flip side, if things don't go as well as you'd hope, you're not going to make that other 100,000.
And as a CFO, I'm constantly trying to figure out how many of my sales reps should attain quota if I've set the plan correctly, because there is a bit of an art and a bit of a science to setting the goals. And so based on the data that you see, Ryan, what percentage of reps attain quota on a quarterly basis?
Well, unfortunately, it's dropped. So we're seeing under 40%. We're seeing in the 30% for a lot of these roles. And the account executives specifically have dropped quite a bit in the last 12 to 18 months. They've gone from mid 40s, high 40s down to mid 30s and low 30s. We talked about this before. It was like the concept of, okay, if I have 10 reps, that is not ideal. So just to be clear, let me start with that.
Yeah, good disclaimer. That's not what you want.
Yeah, in the CFO seat, in the CRO seat, and that's my background. Before I started RepVue, I was a CRO of a publicly traded software company for many years. Before that, I was VP of sales, and then before that, director. And then getting back into the early 2000s, you can tell from my hair color, I was selling software for many, many years. And so I've kind of lived this. And in the low 30s as a CRO, you look at that and you think, well, and believe it or not, you can have low 30s and still like hit your number as a company, as a business, hit the top line number. You can still hit that, but it starts to degrade the quality of the organization. It starts to drive more attrition. And so you don't really want to be there. We love seeing sales organizations that are closer to 60% of the team hitting quota. Is never realistic. And I don't think you should expect it to be 100%. But you asked a question, I think before we were talking about this a little bit, was if I have 10 people on the team, how many should hit, right? And I think about, if I've got 10, I'd love to have one person that's absolutely annihilating their target, right? Like maybe 200% or more. I'd like to have another person that's, maybe 150. Like you've got the bar setter first, right? And then you've got maybe another one that's, the fast follow chaser. And then you probably have 5 to 6 that are kind of right around that number, right? Maybe it's, between 85 and 115%. Maybe they hit, maybe they don't. But if a few of them more miss, then you're kind of on the low side, but they're pretty close. And then you're always going to have a couple, whether it's 2 or 3 that are not there yet. And maybe they're newer, or maybe it's somebody that is just not a great fit or something. So that's always going to be the case. But you have to think about it like that. You really want to get, and what I just described is you've got a bulk of people that, whether they're hitting or not, they're in position. It's structured so that they're close. And again, some of them might miss, but it's not like they're at 40, 50%. They're 80% or higher. So that's the way that you kind of anecdotally think about it as well.
This is the juice that the people come to the pod for, because this distribution is important, not just because a sales rep is grading, hey, how did I hit 100% of quota? But I mean, me as a finance person, I'm always grading myself of how I set the plan, because it's not like just on the rep to hit the number. It's on finance and sales ops and rev ops to put it at a realistic number. And so at the end of the period, if a sales manager is sitting down and looking at 10 reps, you'd said, just to recap, like maybe one is totally crushing it. Maybe another one is ahead of plan. How many people would you say are kind of circling around that, maybe between, what would it be, like 90 and 100%?
Yeah, I think between 85 and 115%, where you're going to have a couple that are blowing it out. And then there's hopefully a large chunk that you as a CRO, you as a CFO, and the CEO is ultimately responsible for this as well. They're building an infrastructure that can support a majority of people that have a chance to achieve their target, right? And so if you've got a couple big time performers and out of 10, and then you have, call it 5 or 6 that are in that, hey, this person can hit their quota. They're doing some of the right stuff. Their territory is working for them. And, maybe they're not going to hit 150%, but they're also not going to hit 50%, right? And so when you take those and you take your top performers, now you're looking at it where like, a really, really good period. And, we use quarter. It can be month, it can be year, depending on deal sizes and things like that. But you've got an opportunity to get to 70% of the people there, right? Which is really, really good. And to clarify, when we talk about quota attainment, we are, like, in the context of what we do at RepVue and what we share on LinkedIn, on Twitter with our users, on our website, we're talking about the percent of people that get to the number or above. And so we do not ask people, when they come to RepVue, we do not ask, did you hit quota? For a couple of reasons. Number one, everybody hit quota. Of course I hit quota. Yeah, check. Yes, I hit my quota. RepVue, we have jobs, so people might think, I better say yes, or I'll be at a disadvantage, things like that. But we ask, what percentage of your team, specific to your role, typically attains their quota, which is more disarming, and it gives us really, really accurate information. That's what we're looking for. Now, when you see 40% of the people hit quota or 60% of the people hit quota, Well, there might be a small number that hit 400% of quota, so that the company blows out their number, and then you've got a whole group of people down here at 50%.
And you'd mentioned earlier that it's still possible for a company to hit their goal, even if only 30 or 40% of the sales reps are hitting it. Just to clarify, is that because the company is overassigned to such a level that they make up for any shortfall?
That's a big part of it. I would say it's not even possible. I would say it's common. I would say it's normal. I would say that's the modus operandi of software companies is how many layers are there? You mentioned Salesforce earlier, right? Like you go from an individual contributor to whoever is kind of the head of their sales org. I don't know which title that would be, but president or CRO or COO or something. 8 layers, right? So so then how does that math work, right? If I'm a first line manager and I have 6 reps on my team, and each one of those reps has, call it a $700,000 quota for the year. That's their quota for, call it ACV. They need to bring in ACV 600K. So that's 7 times 6. So as a manager, I'm sitting on top of $4.2 million of what we'll call quota coverage. Okay, so I've got quota coverage of 4.2. But my director comes to me and says, all right, CJ, let's have a great quarter. You got quota coverage of 4.2. Your goal is 3.4. Okay, great. All right, so that's 3.4. So you've got buffer, right? And guess what your director has? Director has buffer. There's 4 CJs, each with a 3.4, which adds up to, what is that, 13.6, right? So director has 13.6 quota coverage. But in reality, they have 4.2 times 4 when you go down a layer. So the director's like, well, I've got 4 directors. They each have a 3.2. So I've got so then my quota is 10. Maybe that's a little bit of aggressive haircut. We'll say 11.5. So the director has 11.5 quota. The sum of their 4 managers' quota is 13.6. And the sum of their team's quota is 16.8. The sum of all the IC's quota is 16.8. I'm not saying that's evil, by the way. I'm just saying that what if 2 of my reps left? That can and will happen. And then I, as a first line manager, am just totally screwed. No way I'll hit my number unless 2 of my reps hit the 200% or something. And so that's why you get a little bit of buffer, and it just adds up, right? It just adds up. And it also, that whole thing drives efficiency in the model. And I said it's not evil, right? As a sales manager, you're spending all your time going to your salespeople and you're saying, hey, what's your pipeline coverage? Maybe in a quarter, your goal is, whatever that is, 175, I guess. You've only got 250 of pipeline coverage this quarter. You need way more than that. It's the same concept. Deals are going to fail. Deals are going to close loss.
I love how you laid out the math for us there. That was amazing. Hey, thanks for listening. We'll be right back after a word from our sponsors. Reduce burn, extend runway, do more with less. Operational efficiency. These are all catchphrases that we know all too well because of the headwinds business leaders face in today's growth environment. Growth is now a battle, not a breeze. While teams are on the front lines fighting every day for top-line yardage, there are hidden savings opportunities right beneath their feet. That's where Tropic comes into play. Their procurement platform brings order and process to a historically decentralized and chaotic business function: purchasing and supplier management. Tropic serves as the front door for procurement that your entire company will want to use. By combining intake forms, pricing benchmarks, approval workflows, and supplier management all in one place, Tropic makes savings opportunities easy to find and act on. When you pour blood, sweat, and tears into revenue growth, doesn't it make sense to protect what you have fought for? Visit tropicapp.io/metrics to learn how modern businesses are controlling spend to extend their runway. Your board will thank you. Your budget will thank you. Your bottom line will thank you. I want to dig into the cultural element of that because I've also been at organizations with a large field sales force, and we admittedly set the number to the reps, feet on the street, pretty high. Not many of them were hitting their plan, but we who were engaged against the board plan were doing pretty well. We were more than 10% exceeding it. And so then you run into this dynamic of certain people going down the hallway high-fiving because they're hitting their goal. But then the reps are like, what the hell? Like, I'm not getting paid here. Have you seen that happen before and go sideways?
For sure. I mean, it's a great point. You, the CFO and the CEO are high-fiving in the boardroom, right? Another smashed quarter when only 30% of the people are hitting quota. I think really what the thing that it comes down to is I don't At a certain level, salespeople don't care as long as they feel like they have a path to hit their number. If your sales organization is structured and your territories, like if I feel like I can hit my number with a reasonable amount of effort, doing my part, doing the stuff that I need to do as a salesperson, and I can hit my number and the territory's fine, I should know and expect that there's going to be buffer in the system, right? There should be. That's how a business should run. It shouldn't be excessive, and that's okay. And it's just the fact of the matter is where it goes sideways, and what you're talking about, the disgruntled is like where it just feels almost predatory, right? Where it's like we're going to brute force, and it was interesting that I don't know if you saw that Salesforce article, and the title of that article was "Sales by Force." Yeah, so I think conceptually speaking, what I think there is like we're going to brute force our way to hitting a number, right? I know the article's nuanced. There's a whole bunch of stuff in there that's not necessarily specifically related to this concept, but we're going to brute force like, and we'll kind of rag on CFOs sometimes where it's like the CFO looks at the spreadsheet and they see the line that says quota carrying sales rep count, and they're like, well, everyone we add contributes $374,251 in ARR. And so let's add 10 more of those, even though, the target we know is 500,000. That's what brute forcing it is. Whereas, I think in the last year or two, particularly with the macroeconomic conditions, you are seeing a little bit of a shift back to like, what if we kind of went Navy SEAL style? What that means is you're giving people, in the context of sales, you're giving people a higher opportunity to succeed, right? And it's a better trained, smaller team. A funny example is like Mark Benioff actually said earlier this year was like 95% of our business comes from 50% of our sales team members. Yeah, he said that publicly. And a lot of people were shocked. And I'm like, well, that's how it's been at every software company for many, many years. And it's because, well, we can add more sales capacity and we think that'll do it. And it kind of, I think we've kind of hit the end of that road of that strategy here in the last year or so.
If I'm a CFO and I'm looking at the plan for next year, Ryan, and I'm saying I'm going to make some of these territories smaller and throw more reps at it, any words of caution there before I do it?
You really should look at realistic addressable market metrics. And, RepVue is a venture-backed company, so I'm very familiar with the concept of, hey, pitch the TAM. Wow, this is massive TAM here, right? But when you go like, well, who can we actually call on?
The serviceable addressable market.
Yeah. And I think sometimes we get a little too far apart on the serviceable addressable market of like, because you just asked a question. The question you asked is, I'm going to split my territories. And, ideally you have a kind of a method and a methodology and a sound process around what can one sales professional kind of support and engage with from whether it's in a territory, whether that's geographic. It always just comes down to like how many accounts in their territory, right? That are reasonably serviceable, like and defensively serviceable, right? Like, and so do you have more accounts that are not being touched adequately? Do you have some set of accounts? Is there a green field? Like, let's go hire some more reps. Let's build this out. Let's go attack that. But if it's like the same set of accounts and maybe you can improve your quality by moving some of the low performers out and big performers in, but splitting territories at some point, it just becomes a process of annoying salespeople and causing attrition because there's only so much you can squeeze out of it. So what I would just say, you really need to look at and be really tight on what is the serviceable addressable market, reachable. Sometimes I call it RAM versus TAM, reachable addressable market versus total addressable market.
And within that, I think you'd said greenfield. Two terms that I've heard thrown around in the past are blue ocean and red ocean. And correct me if I'm wrong on my definitions here, but my understanding is that blue ocean is that it's basically unclaimed and you can go after it and there's not much competition there. And then red ocean is when you're trying to displace somebody. So do you think that should factor into any market analysis as well to see if you want to flood the territory?
Yeah, I think that's right. Familiar with those terms as well. I mean, obviously, blue ocean. If you're using that definition, that for salespeople, we love it. You still have to sell. You still have to prove a pain. And maybe there's a reason they're not using some other solution for this, though. So there could be hurdles and challenges. So nothing is easy, right? You're always competing for dollars and competing for attention. Then on the flip side, red ocean, well, they have a pain and they're willing to spend money for your solution. But ripping out and replacing, depending on the complexity of your solution, is challenging, right? So if you give a salesperson a territory of 100 accounts and they're all installed with somebody else, right? It's like, oh man, that can be tough, right? Like, hey, call me back in 18 months when our contract's up. Well, okay, like 40 of your accounts tell you that. Now you have 60 accounts, right, for the next 18 months to target. So all things equal, I think when I talk about greenfield, I'm talking about the terminology of greenfield is like you're essentially creating in a startup world, you're kind of creating, you're accessing addressable market that's never been touched by your solution. It's not even so much they know about what you have and they've evaluated. They didn't go with a vendor, so maybe blue ocean means. And so there's definitely similarities. I could probably figure out the nuance between blue ocean and greenfield. But I'm talking about greenfield. I'm talking about you can add more salespeople because you have accounts, and it could be claimed by competitors. They could be not, but it's accounts that are essentially not being touched by your organization because you've got 10,000 account lists and you've got 20 reps and they can't, they can't do 500 accounts each, right? So if you go to your TAM and you sort it out and you're like, all right, my TAM is 10, these 10,000 accounts represent a really appropriate addressable market. Then you say, all right, well, what is one reasonable salesperson? What can they manage knowing touch points and, how hard the deals are or whatever? It's probably not 500, maybe a couple hundred, or maybe it is if it's really SMB. And so then you're like, well, I've got 10 AEs, I've got greenfield, essentially like, let's go. And then you get to your capacity of like, all right, we'll set a number at 200 accounts per rep. So that's 50 reps. And then you adjust. But when you get to that point, you can't just, as a CFO, you can't just be like, man, we grew to 50 reps and now we're doing really well. Let's add 50 more.
No, they're diminishing returns after a while because the early adopters buy your stuff first.
Yeah. The greenfield would be, oh, and guess what? We found another 10,000 accounts.
Now we're going into this new sector. Like we haven't done education or government before, and now that's greenfield.
Yep. Or new product, right? New product, new sector, right? Or international, or, that's how you think about that.
To link it together, I want to get to how you pay reps then once you come up with the capacity. So a rule of thumb that I've used in the past is that you want the ratio of quota to OTE to be 5x when you're at like a healthy state. Do you think that's high, low? Does it change like over a company's maturity?
No, I think that's always kind of been the standard. First of all, SaaS has been unprofitable for a long, long time, right? So maybe this is all wrong, right? This is just what people have done, which is fine. So you have $100,000 base pay, you have $100,000 variable. The model looks like this is a human with $200,000 total comp, assuming on their number. So 5x would be 5x that 200. So maybe that's $1 million quota because that's 5x. Yeah. Yep. So, and then you have your 50-50 base to OTE ratio. So sometimes you'll hear is a 10x base ratio. So similar.
Oh, I've never done the base ratio. That's good. I've never done it that way too.
Yeah. A lot of people do that as well. Sometimes when you're not 50-50, there's a little nuance in there, but standard operating procedure, more mature SaaS company, 50-50, 10 this, 5 this, and that's your 100, 200, million, plug in whatever your comp is. And so that's 5x. And then earlier stage, sometimes it can be a little bit loosened, 3 to 4x maybe. First of all, you can justify that because let's just say we're talking about tech and software, and it's probably funded, it's probably VC funded, and so you're using venture capital dollars to fund that. That's how, because it's not a profitable endeavor to do 3.5x, right? It just, you can't sustain yourself that way. And then you layer on, oh, we're going to have an SDR team. Right. And we're going to, and I see this question all the time. Nobody's ever answered it, which is like, well, how do I prove the profitability of my SDRs? I say nobody's ever answered it because that's not a question you should be thinking about answering. You should be thinking about, this is my total cost of a deal. And my total cost of a deal is this. And to ensure that there's some profitability and efficiency in there, what I really need to think about is how do I distribute those dollars among team members? Do I want to have a team of 50 AEs and 25 SDRs? Maybe I do, because then, the AEs don't have to spend all their time prospecting and doing work that a more junior person that's earlier in their career and wants to move up, maybe they can do that work. Anyways, the 5-to-1 ratio is appropriate. A lot of these companies in the last few years are on 5-to-1 ratio, and they're still not very profitable at all. And so it's the standard. I just don't know what that really even means, other than that's just the standard, and it's what everybody else kind of does. So that's what we should do.
I have anecdotally heard though that a company like we keep bringing up Salesforce, but let's use AWS as an example, or Google. Now you have like 150 products to sell, and they're also looking at a different financial profile where they want to make a profit. I've heard some of those reps can have like a 9, 10, 11x ratio. Is that true?
You mentioned a couple that may have some usage components to their plan, possibly.
Great point. That was an awesome call out. Yeah, it's not just SaaS; it's consumption based.
Right. So my quota might be higher, but what's going to happen? I'm going to bring them in at a lower amount, and then hopefully their usage will scale. And so it's a different way to get to similar, as an AWS rep, maybe a senior person, right? Hey, I want to be bringing in 400 grand, 500 grand, but hit my number and all that. You're going to do that a little differently than a Salesforce rep who's just going to hit these new deals and then they're going to upsell seats. Whereas, AWS, there's consumption, right? And I brought on this company. I know they're going to grow really fast. So I'm going to crush my number because the consumption is going to go up. So and there's some of that going on, at like a Snowflake or, other organizations like that where you'll have some of that. So when I'm talking about the 5-to-1, I'm really talking about kind of a more of a down the middle ACV versus a consumption model.
And just for listeners, so like if I'm at a Gong where it's SaaS and versus Snowflake, which is usage based, you're saying those two comp plans should look pretty different?
They're going to look different in their structure, but at the end of the day, I think those two companies, for example, might compete for the same really good technology salesperson. And so what they're going to want to communicate is, hey, you have the opportunity to far exceed your number and get total comp of X. And it's not like one's going to say something way different than the other, but structurally speaking, yes, Gong is that they would say they're not a single product thing because they've expanded, but it's kind of what you're selling, and you're signing up a customer and it's a number of seats, and this is the deal value versus, like, I guess Snowflake was the example used, right? Like, we don't get like the structures of the comp plan. So I don't know all the intricacies. I just know that there's consumption based in there. There's different ways to look at upside, and there's different ways to structure the plan where you as a salesperson get credit. And I've done some plans like this as well in the past where you bring in a customer and you get credit for what they do for at least some period of time. And in a consumption-based model, a lot of times companies will sign up without much commitment. And Snowflake will say, we have a great thing going here, and we know if we can just get them in the door, they're going to really, really grow on our platform.
They got me with it, and it worked.
Yeah. So you probably started out with not a massive commitment.
No, it was super low, and it was like a 6-month small contract, and we ended up blowing it out, and then we signed up for a 3-year deal. So it worked.
You signed up for the small thing, you blew it out, and then you're paying them a lot, and they're like, hey, we can reduce your bill, right? Just commit to this 3-year thing. And what they did was they said, you will now commit. And you're like, well, we know we're going way over that. We're going to keep using it. So let's commit. And then Snowflake all of a sudden is now like happy that they've got a commitment, right? And that's, the historical thing with tech companies is like the committed revenue is better than the transactional revenue. And so it's a good strategy for them, and it's lower risk for you if it's just not out of the gate. For a period of time, you're overpaying, and then that salesperson is going back and saying, hey, now I've got this commitment thing. And so they can come in and score more points on that.
And it worked out for both of us in that sense, and we're happy. But where sometimes you find orgs that aren't happy. So as a CFO specifically, I do get frustrated when the commission we pay out in one quarter, it's like 120%. But the achievement to plan is like 93%. So we kind of missed the mark there. And so in your experience, why does that happen?
It really shouldn't happen, at that level. Depending on the, I mean, if you have 3 salespeople, it's a badly constructed comp plan. You could have a couple of really, really good performers where their kind of loaded commission rate ends up around 18% or something like that in a recurring revenue business. Whereas your standard base commission rate might be 10%, and again, if you think about that, your quota is $1 million and your variable comp is 100,000. By definition, calculated base commission rate generally would be 10% because 10%, that's 10% ratio. But so when you overachieve and overachieve and overachieve, you get these kickers and additional, incremental percentage points on top of that. But there's no, that should be capped and limited. And so as a CRO myself, that's something I looked at every quarter. And I had a big team, a couple hundred AEs or 250 salespeople, and 125 of them were AEs. And if I saw 120 versus 93, our CEO and me were probably having a tough conversation about why the comp plan is completely broken, right? It should, 93, if we end at 93 of the number, I could probably argue that, maybe up to 100. And so how do you fix it? If you have really great accelerators, you might need to consider some decelerators, right? Like you don't just get paid, so decelerate and accelerate. I think that's really an easy mechanism, or structurally, you might have a problem with the plan. The actual math, you might need to really take a look at that.
So I'm glad you brought up the word accelerator. I'm gonna derivative of that question. It's controversial. Do you think that sales spiffs work? And if so, when's the best time to use them in your sales experience?
I love sales spiffs, but I think people misuse them is the problem, right? I think
a lot of finance guys are listening to this right now, Ryan, and saying, "Oh, I hate spiffs." So,
well, they're misused is why they probably hate them, right? A spiff should not. A lot of spiffs should not even raise to the level of like being on finance's radar, right? It should be a really short-term thing, short-term outcome driven, and immediately gratified. And so what I mean by that is, and it should not be tied to your core metrics, really, in my opinion. It's not like, hey, we're going to miss our number. If we hit our number, like I'm going to do, it's really like, all right, hey, the way I used to like to do spiffs would be something like, hey, it's Wednesday. Like let's do a kind of a opportunity generation thing between now and the end of the week. Let's see if we can create some pipeline. And so whoever gets pipeline, generates the top 4 people that create the most new deals, new opportunities in our pipeline, here's $250 gift card. So your short term, it's not, your core number is revenue or new business, right? So it's not like necessarily tied to that. And so I look at spiffs as just something that can be fun and light. I think where they go wrong is people get them so tied into like almost hard to separate from the actual number, like the goal and the number itself.
Yeah, and we had talked to Ethan Schechter, who was the first sales leader at Sneak, longest tenured sales leader there, and he was describing to us that he thinks of spiffs as a way to get more out of the middle of his pack. Because the way he explained it to me was that, like, I know my high achievers are going to be high achievers. I know my low achievers aren't going to make it for that quarter, or they're still ramping. But this is the way for me to get someone who's going to hit like 80% to like 95%. I'm curious if you agree with that.
It's not really a matter of agreeing or disagreeing. I think I would be more curious as to the mechanism of that. So I love that concept, which is like, it's kind of what I talked about earlier, which is like you have a couple of folks that are like, the 200% person, the 150, and then you've got that 5 or 6 that are kind of like in that 85 to 115. So he's talking about like, hey, if I can get a couple more of those 85 to 90s up to 100 to 105, I love that concept. I just would question, like, let's make sure, like, how are we, like, what is the spiff? Like, is it just like, hey, if you hit your number, then I'm going to give you a trip somewhere? Like, okay, like I like trips and stuff like that. And those are good motivators, but then that does potentially get you in that area of like 120% versus 93%. Like, how are we getting people there? Right. Like, that's, and a spiff, I love the concept of a president's club thing. I don't see that as a spiff. I see that as kind of standard operating procedure for most orgs. But so I would say, like, conceptually, I love the idea of like, how do we get those, if we have 5 to 7 that are like between 85 and 115, how do we make sure we maximize those that get to 100 because morale and they're happy and all that. I would just, kind of tread a little lightly on what is the mechanism of the spiff.
This is probably a throwaway comment, but I used to always be the person. We used to always do watches for some reason. Salespeople just love watches. I think it's because they can wear it and they can tell people where it came from. But I used to be the finance person who had to go and physically purchase them all online, and then get them sent to the rep. So I would have to like Slack them, like, which watch do you want? So I'm glad I don't have to do that anymore.
What was the nicest watch you ever bought?
The nicest watch, somebody closed. I think it was the biggest deal in the company history at the time. It was like over $1 million, and I think it was like a $5,000 watch, like a $5,000 Rolex. I'm curious, what's the nicest like reward you've ever seen a sales rep get?
I mean, we used to do like a 10K, $10,000 for like our salesperson of the year award. But it was just one of those things we did every single year, is budgeted for, and we'd give the big check. So like the golf check, we used to at our kickoff. So I love a big check, a golf check. We had a spinner wheel with prizes on it for certain spiffs. So like think of like almost a vertical wheel of fortune wheel, like with the tick 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 tick, and we put very like a TV on it, like just things like of that nature, of like a couple $100 to maybe $1,000 or something on that.
I had a sales leader tell me that when he was like 25 years old, he crushed his number at his sales job, and the prize was that you got the company leased you a Porsche convertible for the summer. So he was like a 25-year-old kid driving around in this sweet Porsche convertible for the summer. He said it was the best summer he ever had.
So it was only for like 3 or 4 months that
It was only for 3 months, but I mean,
so it's only
three
it's only a
months.
few grand, right? It's like it's not
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
He loved it. He loved it. I think we also had a Plinko board, and you drop the Plinko, and so you'd win a spiff. You get to drop a Plinko chip into the Plinko board, and the things at the bottom would be different prizes. That's the kind of stuff. It just that it's fun, and you can do that without that. Those are the kind of things that don't really cost a lot of money. If it's like, hey, you got some AirPods or something. But we would always try and tie that to like some other, like who can get the most of their contracts with an upfront payment this quarter.
Ooh, I like that one.
Things like that, where it's like what behavior you're trying, or like most upfront payments, or anytime you get a 2-year deal, you get something small.
I also worked at another place. I felt like we were just giving away iPads left and right. I was like, you get an iPad, you get an iPad, you get an iPad.
That stuff can be fun and that's it, but it's all got to net out at the end of the day, right? In terms of your total cost of sales and marketing. And, if it works, it works. But I think, again, a lot of dollars have flown from LPs to VCs to tech companies and down the toilet over the last 10 years.
What's the biggest single commission check you've ever heard of in like enterprise SaaS? Like for one deal.
I don't know if I've heard of $1 million one for one deal, but I've heard of a few north of 500K.
For a deal. Wow.
So this is where sometimes typically a larger org.
That would have to be like a $50 million deal, right?
Well, not necessarily, right? Because for a SaaS company, when you're over your number, you're over your annual number, you're over 150% of your number, you've checked these 3 boxes, you've hit this and you've hit that, you can see, the highest end loaded commission percentage on a deal can be close to 25%. And because they're way over their number, right? Now, at the end of the year, they made that big commission check, and you look back, and this is my W-2, take out my base, my loaded commission rate might be 18, 19, 20%. This one deal was massive. It was paid out at 25%. And then the other stuff was 10, 12, 13, 15. If you are way above your number, and say you got $1.5 million quota for an enterprise seller, $1.5 million quota, you're at 2.5. You get 3 or 4 big deals, and then the end of the year, that last $1.5 million deal comes in, 1.5 million. Yeah,
that's a good Christmas.
Many hundreds of thousands of dollars for that last deal that comes in, right? And this is the challenge. Like the CFO and the CEO need to look at that deal, and they need to be doing more high fives. If they're kind of like grumpy about it, then the comp plans might be set up a little bit wrong, right? They've got to be excited.
I'm excited about that. And I think it's also great because word will get out to the other reps that people are making money. I look at it too. It's not just making that one rep feel whole and feel appreciated, but it tells a story that we're willing to pay people for high performance.
Yep, exactly.
I had heard this story from a friend. So like I didn't know the person, but this is like back in the 90s when doing like hardware sales. It was either at Dell or at IBM. But the rep had closed some absolutely massive deal, and it was like a check, like a 500,000 or like a 750,000 or even $1 million check. And they went out and bought a Cape House with it in Massachusetts. And then the deal fell through. And then they tried to claw it back, and he's like, "I already bought the house. Like I can't do that." So you hear like crazy stories from back in the day with these things.
Oh my God, that's brutal. Yeah, I don't even want to think. I wouldn't even want to think about that.
So get into some trends here. So what are some of the impacts at RepVue that you're seeing, post COVID? Because we had this zero interest rate environment. Has the way that reps are quoted and paid changed since then?
Well, yeah, I think the biggest, so zero interest rate environment, you mentioned that post-COVID zero interest rate. So money was flowing in, right? And it created like from VCs, and funding was super easy for tech companies. If you had a pulse, you could get funding. I'm not saying that's how RepVue got funded, but I'm just saying it was very, very easy. We do have a pulse, but I'm talking more about these larger companies and the software companies and things like that. And so everybody's competing for it. So what do you do with that money? You go, hey, add 50 more reps. The competition for talent was super, super high. So that's demand. So the price goes up. Fixed supply, demand. I was an econ major. This is the only thing I remember from economics in college. You've got demand going up. So, and a fixed set of supply, right? The salespeople. So like they're gonna pay them more. So they pay them more. Right. And then you go back to your 5-to-1 ratio, your OTE went from 200 and now your OTE, we're paying them 250 now because we have to.
But it's probably the same quota, right?
Get these people. Well, no, so it's like it maybe initially, but like you can't just say, all right, hey, remember we used to do this 5-to-1 ratio. Well, we're going to do 4-to-1 now because they're more expensive. Well, it's like, well, I don't know if the economics really work like that. So the quotas might creep up a little bit, but you're making a lot more money. So it's probably all right. And everybody's buying in 2021, 2020, 2022, everybody's buying. And then all of a sudden, with the macroeconomic conditions, quotas are high, nobody's buying, and now nobody's hitting quota, right? And so now that's where we got to with this whole, the mess. So the biggest impact on salespeople at the time was awesome because you could just go anywhere and get any job if you've got some experience in tech sales and parlay that into more and more and more. And then all of a sudden, boom, layoffs hit. And that's where that money went, right? You hear like, well, they're not laying off engineers now. Well, yeah, but the massive hiring boom was more on the sales side. And so it comes up, now it's come down. And so it's been very challenging. And it was the right thing. The layoffs were the right thing to do because people were not hitting, like, it was just way too much capacity. The result was over capacity at sales organizations.
And it really is like a non-linear unwinding that happens because, like you said, it's all those factors stacked together. And then once the tide goes a little bit lower, like the math doesn't hang anymore.
Yep, exactly.
I want to drill into something you said there around like hiring and firing and attrition. So as a finance person who's running the budget, I do have to plan for that attrition and make sure I have enough cushion for reps leaving. What are you seeing as the average attrition rate for sales reps right now? Or said another way, what's the average tenure that you're seeing?
We don't capture, we actually have some of that data. I should pull it. But so, yeah, attrition is a function of tenure, right? So if you say your average tenure is 2 years, then your average attrition rate is going to be 50%, right? So you're turning over half your team every year because the average tenure is 2 years, right? So that's how people should kind of think about that. And then, 2 years, that's what we're talking about out here. I post on LinkedIn a lot and people are like, oh, jump ship every 2 years, 3 years at most, right? If you've been there 3 years, that's amazing. That's long tenure.
Yeah, you're a dinosaur after 3 years now.
Yeah. But that's 3 years. That's a 30. So like the best sellers are going to stay 3 years, then they'll jump and go somewhere else. That means the best you could do would be 33% attrition rate. That's really tough, right? That's really hard. And I did a post like a week or so ago. It was a little controversial because I basically was saying like, you really can't accomplish much in that time period, right? The first year is always going to be kind of like, yeah, you're ramping. And then the second year, you kind of like, you could have a good second year and you're like, oh, you hit your number. And then you hit your number twice, your second or third year, and then you jump. It's like, is that really sustained success or or what's kind of going on here? Like, and I'm not saying not to jump in this tough environments, and some sales orgs are not well run. So there's going to be job hopping, especially in the pandemic. My point was, as a hiring manager, and I know this, like we talk to recruiters all day. We have a product, one of the products RepVue sells is to recruiters, is to employers to help hire people. We hear it all the time. Job hopping is fine. Totally cool with job hopping, but they do want to see one like successful tenure. And we can debate on defining what a successful tenure is. Were you there 4 years? Is that success? Is 2.75 years enough to be successful? I would argue probably not. You can be successful in that role, but what it hasn't shown me is sustained success. sustained success. So job hop right now, fine, a lot of challenges. But what my advice is, try and get in a position as a salesperson where you can win for a few years in a row, not including your ramp year.
Well, what my mind goes to, Ryan, is that most equity at startup tech companies vests over 4 years, and you're saying the tenure is somewhere between 2 and 3.
That's right.
Did you have any insights as to if CEOs or CFOs were adjusting quotas mid-period to help those sales reps out when the economy kind of bottomed out there for a while? Does that ever actually happen in reality?
It does happen. I would say, when you talk about mid-period, right, maybe not intra-quarter.
No, but quarter to quarter.
They could, yeah. But I wouldn't. The reality of it is, and we've seen this, that is what you would bucket as a corrective action. And the effect of that corrective action would be you're going to enable more people to see some success. You're going to maybe retain some more people. Your economics don't improve in that way. So it does happen, but the more common corrective action is a reduction in force. That normalizes in the same way, really. And it's better economically for the business. And I think that's what we saw over the last 12 to 15 months is, let's just lower everybody's quotas. And so it's we could lower them a little bit, but we can't lower them 30% and sustain that economically. So that's why in the boardroom, it's we could lower quotas. No, it's really about right sizing the headcount of the org as the more specific corrective action that I've seen taken. Although anecdotally, yes, I know for a fact that certain well-known tech organizations have done some reductions in quota.
That is interesting though, because that is essentially a quota reduction because you're taking people who are competing for the same deals out of the field to give you a better chance of that at bat getting on base.
That's right. The reverse of slicing the pie up in too many slices.
Yeah, I like that. I never thought about it that way. So last question I got for you here. So we talk a lot about tools and software stacks in the show. And as a finance guy, I admit I can be pretty cheap as to the tools I pay for the reps to use. And I did notice that on RepVue, you track the tools that the company will provide, like a Gong or SalesLoft. So does that really matter to sales reps? Or are reps actually making decisions based on that? And should I pay for better tools?
No, I mean, I think that what really matters is that you have an effective and efficient tech stack. Arguing over, and I hate to say it, the overlap in what these tools do is so similar. The whole outreach versus SalesLoft, I have no idea what the differences are. They will tell you that theirs might or might not be better, and they're both fine quality tools. As a hiring person, you have the right tools in place, right? At RepVue, for example, we use Chorus by ZoomInfo, and we looked at Gong, which we really liked. We're a startup. We only need a couple seats. It was way cheaper for startups, so for 40% of the price and not maybe 90% of the functionality, it's a no-brainer. That's one example of these are all, a lot of these tools are kind of quality, they're well done. Sellers expect a modern stack. They need the contact data, with ZoomInfo is there in that space, Sales Intel, Apollo, all these folks in there. As a CFO, I've been surprised. I've bought a lot of software in the last few years. There's a wide discrepancy in price on some of these similar tools, very wide.
It's sometimes 3x.
Yeah, exactly. And some of them it's 3x, and maybe that's this one's, maybe it's been a little bit more built for the enterprise, or they have this and that. And so you look at your stage and can we implement it easily? What's the total cost of ownership? To answer your question specifically, salespeople want a modern tech stack. Every once in a while, somebody will say, "Oh, I'll never use this instead of this." Well, we use this, so especially now, I would be more concerned about, hey, let's make sure we don't have any big gaps. And I know some CROs are I'm only ever going to use Salesforce, or
yeah, I've worked with CROs like that. They're I need Gong, and cool. If that makes you successful, I'll buy it.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Well, maybe, and it may be that they've only ever used it. Not that they've used something else and it was terrible. It's just, I've only ever used this and I love it. Well, it's well, look at this one, because it's kind of the same, or maybe it's not. And so, I don't get to, we love the data, and it's really interesting for us to see, kind of who's using what, and our salespeople and our users love it too. But I don't think it's like the end all be all in terms of the decision process.
Are there any tools that have caught your eye lately, specifically for sales reps, or any that you think are on the rise?
I mean, we actually started using Apollo for contact information, and I like that one. I mentioned, we use Chorus as a business, like outside of the sales stuff. We use Gusto, and I love Gusto, by the way.
We talked to the head of finance from Gusto last week. They're great.
Yeah, it's my favorite software platform. I'm a old school Salesforce power user. I would
tried and true.
But if somebody was like, "Hey, here's this," down the road, we obviously focus on RepVue, but it's like if there's like, "Oh, this incredible opportunity," but we use HubSpot, man, sure, we can figure it out.
Well, Ryan, this has been a blast. People are going to dig this. Sales comp is something that people are always asking to pull the curtain back on. So thanks so much for carving out time for us today.
Awesome. Yeah, this is great. Enjoyed it. This is all stuff I live and breathe, and we talk about every day. So love talking about it.
Thank you, sir. Roll the credits, producer Natalie. Run the Numbers is part of the Turpentine Podcast Network. It is produced by Natalie Torin and edited by Justin Golden. Album artwork by Some AI Thing. Yelling and intro by Fat Joe. If you made it this far, please give us 5 stars. I really need this.